Shirley here with Jupiter point of Thales, and the ascendant is in between a Neptune and a Rahu, and also the midheaven, an aretic Jupiterian ascendant on a Jupiter hour. This is a moon day. Moon is next to Procyon, so let's call on the giants. So let's call on Spica with Lilith Spica in the eighth house. For eloquence, for delivering the information, be protected, and in the light of justice. Let's call on a Procyon, that is the great denucleificator, to be favored. Okay, to be favored when I place this message. And when I say to be favored, it's basically, to sweeten any enmity that those words could create, or fear that those words could create. I came here. Jupiter is 11th degree Gemini. In the fourth house, Mercury just left a conjunction with the Sun. It's 22 degrees Aquarius. Great degree to learn about child assassins. I'm listening to Anneke Lucas' podcast with Epochi, and I might link it in the comments. So I would like to talk about some things I did when I was in academia. And one of them is, let's talk about what I wrote, because that is a background that would lead to certain segments in my life, but also it's important information. And my goal was not to stay in the ivory tower, where everybody tells you that, it was not my goal. And this is why I began to do podcasting to begin with, and it's still so. So I want to begin to honor Sedna, as this is going to be the groundwork. Sedna is trining Pluto in the orb. She's retrograde in 0 degree Gemini, okay, the very Gemini degree of accepting duality, and all things that are associated with the sign. And so Sedna is an Inuit goddess. As an asteroid, Sedna takes 1,200 years to surround the zodiac. There are many stories around Sedna, but basically, if you dig in through the myth, as I previously addressed, you see that back to Inuit society. If you think about Inuit, they lived in climates that were not easy and depended on fish. So in terms of the housing, they would live sometimes an entire village in a house. That breeded a certain culture where the hunters that went for the fish, naturally, they had the respect, and the shamans, okay? So while women were cooking and so on, women did not decide when to have a child, with whom to have a child. The father would wed the daughter. There was plenty of incest. The perception around sexuality was that if a woman is alone and her husband went to hunting, a man has to make sure she's sexually satisfied. Now that is important to emphasize. So it's not like, oh, patriarchy, but it's also important to emphasize it was not some equity-based religion in the sense that we would predict it today, or religion or culture. And so Sedna did not want to wed. And some versions, her father punished her by wedding her to a dog. And then she was happy with the dog. And everybody got insulted that Sedna did not want to wed them. Am I not good enough? Am I not this? And Sedna is the beginning of erotic intelligence, because the reason she did not want to wed these men would have to do with sexual compatibility. Why is no man good enough? Well, in a society where you don't have sovereignty as a woman, no man can be good enough. Now, when we talk about bloodlines, we talk about Mars, we talk about lineage, we talk about Saturn, and bloodline, whatever competence you have in your bloodline, whether it's a warrior or whatever you're meant to do, which is Mars, that bloodline is in context, is in social context. And if the social context is such that the yin and yang have imbalance, okay, where the feminine, the masculine, the women, the men have an imbalance, then we would see mercurial gods like Eshu in Africa, but to some degree Sedna, although she's associated with the moon, and modernly we see it, and I recently saw a video about Baphomet. And so those are the gods that try to balance one and another, but they also, you see that complete balance cancels sexual polarity. On the other hand, what the result of that is increased sexual polarity. You can think about that A bomb that was manufactured by people that were considered two gender. There were attempts to cancel sexual polarity, and the dropping of the A bomb or the Chernobyl leak as something that increased extinct species and species that would not use sexual polarity to procreate began to procreate with sexual polarity. So this is what we know about Chernobyl. Now, let's go a little bit. So first of all, because my groundwork began with Sedna, and because this is going all the way back to the Inuit, and because whatever we call the Illuminati, the Templars, the Masons, the Enlightenment, the Satanists, they are all globalist culture or cults that comprise their practices from pre-biblical tribal society that later translated to biblical society. So we cannot understand, for example, Lilith without knowing that Lilith was in Babylonian times, she was a goddess of fertility. Diana was goddess of fertility, and then in Hellenistic society, she began to be Artemis that defended women from rape. What changed? At first, they thought only women bring the children and men have to worship them like a god. Then men discovered that they are also part of conception. Then they began to exercise this power. Now you had to have gods that defend from men abusing their power. And the Lilith in the biblical times, the female goddess was outthrown because men began to learn about their own power. So they began to go to the extreme. And then what you get when a person is excluded, doesn't get to decide for who they have sex with, when will they have children. Okay, kind of like the Inuit Sedna story that points us to even pre-Diana times, pre-Babylonian times, because Inuit society is more ancient. And all these cycles that the Indians will later call the Kali Yuga and the Golden Ages, and so on and so forth. So, what's important to emphasize is that those people who worship Satan, who worship Baphomet, who worship all these people, they comprise their practices, the good, the bad, and the ritual abuse. And I'm talking about torturing in the womb. If you listen to Anneke Lucas, if you listen to Fritz, I don't remember what the name, Trudy Verstegen talks about this as well. She had her children kidnapped. She was married to a man that raped her. Okay, and she talks about that. And so those things, those practices are comprised from these tribal practices. And when the goddesses were thrown, they came back to the situation of Sedna. In Sedna times, they said that the shaman has to appease Sedna because Sedna was killed. Her hands were taken from her, what the woman would use to cook or to prepare meals or to comb her hair. Okay, that was taken from her, but it's also what women use nowadays, okay, to write. And this is Sedna's story is very important in Gemini with media people of the professions, okay, of to speak up, public speakers, and so on and so forth. If I think about it, journalist Peter R. de Vries that did cold cases in Netherlands. The Netherlands has 22-degree Virgo, Gemini rule, 22-degree lot of fortune. I don't know if that was perfecting or not perfecting, but it was at the time where Sedna would go to conjunct his Ketu. And there was eclipses, and then he was assassinated. and that was some form of betrayal. He was very supportive of Moroccan society, against races against Moroccans, and they made it to have some Moroccan drug lord supposedly liquidated him, um, and the Polish guy pulling the gun. But there was a structure issue, very, very strong at that, and I've addressed it in length in previous channels. Now, that disclaimer that we're talking about practices since Inuit times is highly important to understand enlightenment, because we understand nothing about what people call now reptilians, elite, MK Ultra, and thanks God we are having this conversation, but we understand nothing without understanding that these are not the colonizers, these are practices that are pre-biblical, pre-Babylonian, that go all the way back to the Inuit. And if we don't address that in society all the way back to the Inuit, abolishing the horrid reality where children are slaughtered. And by the way, infanticide was a common practice in Inuit society. They would slaughter the children that nobody could care for. They had to feed the people. Okay, so there's harsh climate, cold climate, and that was the case. And if a woman would not wed, then who would take care of her? Who would hunt for her? Okay, she would become a burden on that, and they began to kill these women. Was also practiced in Bedouin society, in climate that was not at all desert. And I know because I live in the area. You have sugar canes, you have eucalyptus, which you plant in a swamp, growing on a mountain that's 500 meters above sea level. And I said, this is a desert. We are reforesting. We're not reforesting. That was not. We are reforesting. We're not. That was not a desert. 100 years ago, that was not a desert. And you can see these things about climate with California. Okay, after the song, I hate California. It's cold and it's damp. Okay, so that's the change in climates that have to do. They're both affecting our society and are affected by our society. So I'm not a sociologist. This is information that would need to complete. By the way, the instructor for my thesis was sociologist, philosopher of science, and an MD, so Renaissance man. Now, with that disclaimer, let's go to my research. It's more recent times. And three main works that I can recall that I did. One was at the housing market in Sweden, and that was pertaining to the fact that there was an ongoing bubble that was well kept. So people would want regulations removed, but if there is no new construction, let's say ecosystemic villages and infrastructures in rural places in Sweden, you will not get, even by the privatized market, you would not get with the results that you want to get, as well as we know that the way to prevent houses prices from going down is to control for how many houses we have. So, for example, I lived in Israel in a village called Arad. It territorially is the biggest city in Israel. It's a small village, and to release grounds to be built, okay, they control the housing prices. It doesn't matter that people are homeless, that people are raped, that people are tortured, that people are sacrificed, that people are ritually abused. Okay, nobody cares about that, okay? Fiscally, to make the real estate market, okay, sustain so that you can money launder, then they decide, well, we don't build. They do it with bureaucracy. We don't release these grounds. And sometimes you would see tycoons. Okay, now, of course, if tycoons would manage to build, they would hold the buildings from sales. Okay, it's kind of like, hey, you want to make sure that there is a lack of something, so people still want to pay, okay, good money for it. So even in privatized terms, that would not be an issue. But when you have a high regulation over the housing prices, and instead of building in rural places, you just keep whatever it is. So people say there's a black market, there's a black market, there's a black market. It is true, and just increase, just remove that regulation. Okay, this is a way to privatize the market which will not in any way assist people unless you actually build, as you know, unless you actually not only build more houses, but build more houses that people can sustain. Going back to the Inuit, we would need housing situations that allows people to have a sovereignty. We would need housing situations that don't breed incest. Now, and politically, one of the common leaders we have right now is Vladimir Putin, and we have his natal chart. My predictions, we have his natal chart. He has Chiron in the fourth house. Chiron in the fourth house in Capricorn rules infrastructure, and he is known to correct infrastructure in Russia. That would be remedy for his Chiron in the fourth house. And therefore, he's a very appreciated leader, okay? Not just culturally, people look at him as, okay, a man that they are fearing or so on, but they also appreciate him because they watch how the infrastructure is in Russia. And I've never gotten to travel there, but this is what I heard from people who travel to Russia, who are locals in Russia, and he tends to something that is in his motherland, in his own chart. So it's his own remedy, and as a leader, that sustains him and grants him the respect, and it's also curation for political curation for Russia. Okay, for example, I haven't. There's an episode that's called "The Shoe That Fits" that I want to address Ruta and Putin's chart, especially when it comes to Pisces and to feet, because you would see very clearly how. To make a long story short, if you look at the seventh house of one leader, you see that correcting his feet would be supportive of standing to with the relations with another political leader. That is how the world is interrelated. So Sedna does teach us about that when you talk about the asteroid Sedna. Going to Baphomet, the um, the extreme form of balancing of everything dark and light and so on, so and so and so, and then taking something apart, which is a mercurial activity, and reconnecting that, ends in those rituals that are pre-biblical, that are pre-Masonic, that unfortunately are still practiced. And why am I saying unfortunately? Because you want to listen to Anneke Lucas' testimony. She is survivor as child of these rituals, and our leaders go through these rituals. Our leaders, nobody came to save them. Elite bloodlines are trained in these rituals. It's torture in the womb. What we call a MK Ultra, okay, the military operation, okay, that's not new. It is based on rituals that have been perfecting since Inuit times. And our housing situation will not be resolved without addressing this, because these are both the people that build our houses. Masonry is construction of housing, it's architecture. So I began to tackle the issue of housing. Second thing, if we talk about the MK Ultra, talk about development of ESP, putting people through trauma to develop ESP. And indeed, in my research on ESP, comparative study between China, Russia, and the US, I explored ESP, and I call it the politics of the census. And so the attempts to recruit basically our sensory perception and experience in the body, and to use that for whatever goal it is. Now, I'm not saying that on the very, very, very big picture, good things do not happen to society. Okay, 33-degree Mason is not only about horrid torture and slaughtering children, it's also about what do you do for society at large. Okay, now that you know the essence of the world, what do you do for society at large? And you see that most of these people that would even go down for speaking against WHO, so we have Shinzo Abe, we have Peter de Vries, but those are nothing but the modern JFKs. Okay, Peter de Vries was assigned to JFK back in the Petrarch Oort case, and very likely even before, and that's bloodline based. Okay, if you watch a Misdaad Verslaggever, which took me 3 years to watch after I found out about his death. I did not know who he was. I did not grow up in Netherlands. I don't have a house in Netherlands. It's very simply put. That's why. So it is so, but it is so, and it connects to the language. I have Chiron in the fourth house in Gemini. Okay, that now Sedna is going over. Um, so in those situations, yeah, had to take a moment. Politics of the senses. Yes. Um, and those practices, okay. Then I went to the declassified CIA stuff and so on. The declassified is the stuff you could find on Google. I don't know if you can still find it on Google. And the fact that they extrasensory perception. First of all, it's practiced as a sense, so you cannot test for it like you would test for other scientific evidence. And you would this is why it's considered parapsychology, okay, the psychology of the senses and somatic experience. So with lack of somatic experience that comes with unfortunately trauma, but it's not the only way to develop sensory experiences, and that's very important. Extrasensory experiences are a natural part, a facet of the human nature. Um, it is the desensitization that happens in society for the desire to control things, and some of not from malefic intentions. Okay, if you're an Inuit tribe, you want to make sure no wolves take your children. Okay, so you have to have a control. You have to control everybody's mind so that everybody comes and follows you. And sometimes it's as simple as I was walking at the sea one day, and there were a pack of fish, small fish, and then I was beginning to walk, and they were walking after me. A natural facet of nature. Okay, and I was like, I'm the big fish now, and I'm in big danger. If they catch me, they catch the whole pack. So I withdrew from the pack. Now, because just 2 seconds ago they were without a leader, it was not a problem. But this was a very tiny sociology experiment that I did there with the fish. Um, and it's a psychic philosophical experience that you have in praxis. Jupiter Gemini can give you those experiences, or Mercury in Jupiter's sign, I think gives that. Um, and so those would consider to be detriment signs, but those detriments, they teach you a lot about life. What in praxis does your philosophy mean? And when we talk about the Baphomet in theory, is nothing bad about Baphomet, because it's as above, so below, hermetic principles, the yin and the yang. It looks perfect. Okay. In praxis, if you slaughter children and have children killing children and train them to kill to be good killers of children, train them that every killing is mercy killing, because otherwise that thing would be tortured. You create a pack of Nochbas, a pack of Boko Harams, a pack of suicide killers. That would be used in crime wars. So that's the praxis. And then you can philosophically say it, the yin and the yang. Then you have the people that fight them and so on, and the double agents or the two genders and so on. But first of all, that's pre-biblical, that's pre-Masonic, that's pre-Rosicrucian, and we need to remember that as we come to tend to that, because we are at the times where a lot of people say we don't like cults. That means you don't like tribes. And they have a very good reason to. But do you bring sovereignty, or do you just go Hitlering? Okay, let's kill them all. Okay, how would that benefit you? It's the same thing of looking into the abyss and coming to the abyss, but in action. So you're going to kill people that are trained to be child assassins since the womb, and you're going to be more. You really have to be basically more vile than them to overcome them. And what did you achieve in that? And at the same time, you do need to defend yourself from that. So So the second work I did was around extrasensory perception. In the CIA projects, the challenge was that people were afraid of the church, and that it is a sense. So you cannot test for that. Okay, you have to learn that by increased. It's not, you cannot do increased repetition, but you have to just learn by increased cases that you tend to with remote viewing. By the way, remote viewing is used to locate kidnapped people and locate the missing people. Um, Peter Ad Vries Foundation, that tends to for those things, they could not receive people that do for remote viewing. Okay, and you see the problem is not the family that tended to what 99% of Dutch people, including cold cases, did not tend to. Okay, they are not a problem here. But the problem is that these remote viewing skills are used to kidnap, to create assassins, to later masquerade it as mass shooting, as terror, and so on and so forth. Money changes hands and is laundered in real estate, in gas, in oil, and any such project. Renewable energy projects sometimes, but the solar energy, which is literally the sun, light, has a bit of antidotal properties to that, and I'm exploring that. And this is also why there's a lot of challenges in the transition, but where it happens, you see, like I'm still exploring that. But there's just something about that way of getting the energy from the sun rather than from below ground that changes the economy. It has a holistic effect on the economy that is compatible with the age of air. So my third work, okay, the third in the list of four, would be around the creation of national identity. I'm gonna read to you the title, and I don't agree with everything I wrote there, but I'm going to discuss to you what I don't agree with myself. That was in 2015 or in 2025 is a good time to revise. And this is the myth of spiritual hygiene and the use by colonial empires as a tool in building and preserving a national identity. The British case. So this is the myth of cleanliness. In my first degree, I was introduced by a researcher to the myth of cleanliness and the use of cleanliness in changing times, and cleanliness and racism, and so on and so forth. And then I ran into this book that talks about the creation of psychiatry, because I was interested in Kuhn's perception of. I was interested in Kuhn before I began to study, and there was no philosophy of science per se, so I just learned science, or in that case, it was the social science. In physics, by the way, they are way more supportive of spirit and matter than in the what Feynman would call cult-like sciences, because they would try to imitate the research that was actually that is now actually archaic to the exact sciences, and it's kind of like call me science, but it's like if you go to physics, you see that they're actually doing the opposite. Um, and that's how I ran into the creation of psychiatry. And people say it's not a science. I'm like, it is. People, it is no less. You think about M theory. What is the M in M theory? Okay, that's called like sciences, and that's just a fact. Now let's talk about what I don't agree with myself. So one thing I don't agree with myself is the climate has no connection to mental ailment. I don't know what was I thinking writing that. But this is where I correct myself. Seasonal affective disorder exists. Climate affects housing, which breeds incest in community houses, and suicide. Okay, the result of incest is, in many cases, suicide. Inuit example, and also degeneration. Okay, because if you have incest, then you have degeneration. It's just a facet of the DNA. It likes to be a little bit biodiverse. It's also important when we discuss bloodlines. And so biodiversity is actually the antidote. Okay, and the segments of, I think it was the Rothschilds, the segments of the Rothschild that practiced the biodiversity, I think they were more successful. Okay, doesn't mean that. Now imagine if we abolish satanic ritual abuse and ritual abuse altogether. We would increase our wealth as society, and I believe we are. This would be the differentiation between the golden ages and what people call Kali Yuga or Dark Ages, where all these things and practices that everybody says was conspiracy theory are now exposed and have scientific background of how they work. So we talked about trauma as something that causes people to have less somatic experience, but what we call extra senses or parapsychological experiences is not psychosis, and that's very important to address. Um, it would take me a decade to understand there's no such thing as psychosis. What there is medical experiments in inflicting trauma on people until they dissociate so that they can be mind controlled. It would take me a decade. So I don't expect you to, in one day, listen to me. It's like, oh, who is this person? They studied, they know what. I don't expect you to listen to me because I studied the topic. Okay, do your research. I have my perspective. I am learning. Okay, just a decade ago, I wrote something completely infantile that said that there is the climate change will not affect mental illness. And it's funny because I was the one suffering from what you would call seasonal affective disorder. I lived in Israel also because I was afraid of the wind and the cold in Netherlands. In Europe, I would get depressed sometimes. But later, I would learn that there would be a C factor there that I'm still learning about. Okay, so naturally, um, those are things that we continue to elaborate and we continue to study. Now, this is the second thing I disagree with myself. um, I talked about rationality and irrational behavior. I don't know where I got it from. Probably my Dutch ancestors doing overwork. But let me look at the correction. Um, in my further works, I will address the notion of innovative and conservative standards. This is Larry Loudon, 1990s Larry Loudon. I thank my instructor for that. Um, so for empiricism. The name of instructor is Professor Danny Field. Okay, I don't know if he would turn over in his in his office if he knew what I do with that, but that's the thing. That's the point. Okay, I'm not a good student if I don't innovate or challenge notions of myself even. It means I study something, I did something, but also it doesn't. It's not just change for the sake of change. It's genuine evolution. So um, the means of technology to bridge the gap. So for example, the fact that you don't know that there is technology that can read your thoughts. This is not sci-fi. I was sitting with the developers in Israel. Okay, so I had a friend that was dating a guy that was what they were doing. So you would think about being able to communicate with people in coma or and so on. But this also is that's the thing that Richard. I gotten used to in the past decade to the reality that people that I'm all exposed. What I fantasize about, what I don't fantasize about, when somebody tries to do hypnotic commands on me, when somebody tries to get me to fantasize about things that I don't fantasize about, and that can all be read, and those waves and frequencies you can trace for where it's coming from, and that you can prove MK Ultra, you can prove anything you want. Okay, the technology exists, and this is bridging the gap that would lead me later to my third work, which would be my thesis proposal, and that's saying that tending to the medicines, because my instructor was a doctor, and he says, when I read Feyerabend, I wanted to talk about Feyerabend as a philosopher of science, and you want to look for Feyerabend, don't misunderstand his anything goes. He simply notes the simple fact that when it comes to scientific innovation, we can't predict if any method or epistemic standards, okay, or epistemology or ontology, but it's sometimes actually the change of ontology and the change of epistemology that breeds scientific innovation. Okay, then back then I did channeling experiments, which exposed me to MK Ultra, to all these things, um, and that's the anything goes. Okay, and we cannot escape this truth about science. The science and art are one. And but my instructor was in applied science. He was a doctor. He's an MD, and he says, I'm an MD. When I read Feyerabend, I don't know how to treat a patient. So I said, we got to help Danny to treat a patient. And that's how I got into the medicines, holistic medicines, shamanistic medicines, conventional medicines, all of that in the pre-COVID days. So that would be very fascinating. Um, and my presupposition was that consciousness leaves a trace in matter. I used Elliot 2015. I think Elliot Smith, something like that. Not a musician, but that was the 11 levels of analysis of consciousness and top down and emergence. So he included both top down and emergence processes. That was for him kind of like proving God. I wasn't aiming at proving God. I was just aiming at not ignoring everything that affects reality, and this is also what people call spirits. So I was definitely initiating myself by chance. Okay. When I hear testimony of Annika Lucas and stuff that was done to her and stuff that was as targeted individuals would attempted to do to me, sometimes more or less successfully, I'm like, ooh, I had no idea. So that was the thing. So yeah, that is important. But I also want to remind us all that all these practices are based on tribal practices. Those that cry colonialism today, okay? The those, okay? How do you treat women? How do you treat children? Do children have a childhood? If we had, and I love the woman that wrote about Sedna and Karen in my other video, where she said, I am BIPOC. Okay, I'm a person of color. I don't like hiding behind culture when it comes to women's rights, when it comes to children's rights. I'm like, hurrah, I salute you. It's those people of indigenous societies that I learned from, that I got out of my, I can't be called white, but I mean, I probably am called white, but the thing is that it's funny to me. Um, but the thing is that's the people that got me out of wokeness. Okay, got me out of the political correctness, got me out of, but that would be racist. Okay, got me out of my comfort zone of being uncomfortable and what you call the white guilt, and got me to actually listen to the people. And it's by listening to the people that I learned for what I learned. Okay, if I speak to a Druze person that explores the shifting identities of Druze people to Palestinian, it's not all across the board, and we talk about organization that forbids marriages of women to Muslims, and he looks me dead in the eye and he said, we murder women if they go on another tribe. Okay, then I'm a new person then. With that exchange of gaze, okay, us looking into each other's eyes, and he's saying that it's a different thing. There's a guy in his 40s, in his 50s, doing his PhD on shifting identities, and what does that mean? When I go to look for apartment for myself, and I run into basically a crime lord that I had no idea. I was on his property. It was like, it's not nice to go on property. I was like, I'm looking for a house. And then we sit and we drink coffee, and there's this talk about that organization that takes women back from Muslim people. And then he tells me, he says, we are coming from Maghreb, and we would take Ashkenazi women, so European Jewish women, and we would torture them on purpose, to marry them and torture them. Okay, feminists told me that, and I said, well, for the thing, I said, well, violence. I wouldn't be quick to say that this is the source of violence against women. But when I hear it, when a crime lord, we drink black coffee. Okay, I sit next to him at the couch, we watch a TV. Okay, and then he offers me himself for rent instead of for reduction in rent, and I get the fuck out of there. And then I go for them, resting at the mattress shop, and the guy tells me it was the founder of this shop, and he says to me, "Yeah, I know this person. He's a crime lord. I don't sell him anything." Now, if he doesn't sell him anything, you can understand how connected he is to be able to do so. So to be able to set this boundary. So, um, so that is what I talk about when I talk about Feyerabend. Okay, that's something you don't get with the large N studies, and you never will. Especially not when people are trained in academia. They are coming from certain bloodlines. They go through certain rites. And there's something you can say. There's something you can't say. So yeah. So technology is used to bridge the gap between the conservative and the innovative science. Okay, because innovative science, it's sometimes it's no method. It's Richard Feynman sit popping LSD and with something, a pillow under his neck and something to keep him awake and half awake, half this. It's a form of mental torture to open his imagination. Okay, that's research. If I can tell you for most of my academic work, I would have the gut feeling I want to research that. Why? I have no idea. Then I would listen to Feynman and I would get the essay done. Why? The nervous system connected with the nervous system. It's a nervous system thing. Some people say in astrology, Mercury is exalted in the sign of Aquarius, and that has ground. That has ground because Mercury is our speech, communication, thinking, in practice, okay, and skill. And Aquarius is the gigantic nervous system. So and it's not for nothing that after that type of electromagnetic in Chinese computer is called electric brain, but the brain is electric anyway. That's thermodynamics. That's what it does. And then we go through that wave frequency. It's like, oh, it's almost like the nervous is almost like the ocean. Boom, we are at Pisces. Of course we are. Pluto in Aquarius, Neptune in Pisces. What did Navu deal with? The cutting of the cords of the web in the ocean. Okay, that's fascinating stuff. There, that's fascinating stuff. So what I disagreed was that it was emotion triggered in the masses when they received the message of rational thinking that led them to identify with totally irrational thinking, such as believing science is science before it is scientifically, empirically, according to Age of Enlightenment. You see how dumb I was, because I had no idea that enlightenment is satanic ritual abuse, proves itself to be effective. Okay, that dumbfuckery is shit, but it is what, I don't know how it came out of my mouth, but that was me in 2015, just to prove that people can change and become wiser. Um, but in essence, they were using the field of psychiatry. What they did, they created a myth of the field of psychiatry before there was psychiatry. This is antithetical to Kuhn. That was what fascinated me to do my thesis later. And then I would talk to the medicines, okay? And then came COVID. And then I studied some aromatherapy to understand what I'm talking about. Yeah, and yes, the three torture sessions later. So the myth of spiritual hygiene basically is a myth of cleanliness, and I talk about mental cleanliness. Now, there's nothing wrong with, I don't know, minimalism, where you're supposed to think, or cleaning yourself is something that's actually good, or cleaning the space. But if you pay attention, there would even be courses around being able to clean the space, and a lot of people that would go to trauma, they were either over cleaning or unable to clean. And the use of colonial empires. Now, shampoo comes from India. When we talk about cleanliness, okay? Use of colonial empire as a tool to building and preserving a national identity. And this is basically my argument with Geert Wilders. What I love, adore about Wilders, okay? Where he gave me going every time is where he dares to speak about this Muhammad waiting for Aisha to turn from 6 to 9, okay? Love that. Nobody talks about that. That guy pays with his life for speaking that out loud. Love that. Okay. For the next phase, we talk about superior culture. It's like, it's in our cultures. It's in our bedroom. That's what the elite do for the children. Okay. And it's the children nobody came to save. aka the leaders, like Wilders himself, that are part of those things. So when we talk about the notion of a superior culture, that being said, when Wilders was traveling, he was going to Australia and then traveling to all the countries that nobody wants to go to because they're too scary in the Middle East, and they're too scary because of how they treat women and children. And nobody wants, all these countries, and he was going there, and he was seeing that there is not just the elite and secret societies, and that, no, we don't do that in our society, and you only get to the third degree before you start doing that. Thanks, Anneke Lucas. Okay, but this is how you would get entire 32 degrees of Masons that a person could spend a lifetime completing, it being completely naive. And then a 33rd degree, there's a child you have to slaughter, and then that child had to slaughter a child, okay? For the people that are trained within the cult, they are since childhood doing that. Are they dissociated? No, I don't know, okay? There's just so many things. Because they also train them to be dissociated. There's a lot of mind control, and they're tortured from the womb, but a lot of things. And so that myth of we are better serves as a national identity myth. And so it's both true and untrue. I cannot ignore the fact that, yes, if you went to even Israel, okay, I was sitting as a secretary in human department. I had to do also work, a daytime job, and sometimes it happens, okay. And my boss left me to speak with people, and come people from Eritrea, and there was difference between North Eritrea that were a bit more Christian, and the South Eritrea, a bit more Muslims. And the thing is that I sit with the woman, and I'm supposed to do her papers, so that hotel was working correct with the papers, they got everything correct, and the papers are by her husband, who is in jail. Immediately, I don't hear the story. I'm like, I'm pissed at Israeli police. Why do they arrest him? Da 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 da. I call to the guy. The guy answers me from jail, and he says, and he feels like a sorry puppy. I'm in jail because in Israel you can't beat the wife. Now, they never arrest all these elite people that beat the wife. That's true. They should. They let women be murdered. Why? It's good practice, because anyway, that your narcissist husband is a double agent. He was probably raped since childhood. So he knows how to be charming, but he's also going through this. And when it's you he has to kill, they don't want to save you. You're given the same ultimatum Peter R. de Vries was given. It's like either you Geert Wilders yourself, or you're 24/7 in jail, where the torturers could be the police officer. And he has to thank the police, thank the police, thank the police, or you can't even broadcast what's happening within, or you had the red carpet for the assassin. Police parts like the Nile, okay, and then Peter de Vries chose what he chose. He got assassinated. That's the same thing you're going through when you're trying to divorce your narcissistic husband or wife. It's okay, when men talk about violence they went through, especially from women, nobody believes them, okay, unless it serves some agenda. Unfortunately, unless she's the victim. But now it's changing, but that was the default. And so it is true that if you came to Netherlands and you come from society where it's cool to rape women and marry children, and have you marry her at 12 and then you fuck her and then rape her and then you divorce her, okay, that's Saudi Arabia for you, okay, and that's not the past. They were celebrating where women got driving license. I think it was in Saudi Arabia. Okay, so this is not untrue. The role of the supposed woke West in that, and so on and so forth, Afghanistan, we'll see that. I mean, Uranus is going to go on Beta Persei once again. But other than that, it is also true that it is the culture. Black people say, well, white people didn't create the slavery. They tended to trying to abolish it. Now, very likely, think about Nelson Mandela. He was in prison because of his own people. He learned what colonialism had to offer, and he removed for how the bloodlines and the royal loyalty in his own tribal society and the tribal society itself contributed to the situation of colonialism. So he married a woman from another tribe. Was it rape or not? I don't know. Learned what colonialists had to offer, and then challenged both the king and the colonizers. So this guy challenges the king, so we can't say but anything. And then he was 28 years in prison because of his own society. And so this academic background, okay, which again, there are probably more facets to the picture and more facets to the picture, but this academic background is important for it to be available in a digestible form where you can begin to do your own research. So I gave you Anneke Lucas, I gave you Trudy Verstegen, I gave you for the notion of colonialism, okay? I talked to you about my work, which is, yes, not widespread. Some of it was confiscated. I had to run. I had to this. Okay, I have the fascinating story of both the mad scientists and the targeting the individuals. Like, it's a very sexy story. You don't get a lot of good sex from that. I can tell you that. It's a lot of rape, unfortunately. But but the sexy story is a sexy story, right? It is that story, and sometimes that harms me because it's a serious story and it's not for the yellow pages. Um, and what you need to learn from it is serious things. Okay, the cautionary tale is not to be cautionary tale. They murdered people like the Freeze for it to be cautionary tale. They murdered people like a JFK for it to be cautionary tale. They murdered scientists you don't even know about, and I don't even know about, because of this cautionary tale. They put Geert Wilders in fucking prison and then place him as this extreme right-wing leader. There was not extreme right. The extreme right wing in the Netherlands is the party that wants people to be 75% Dutch. You don't hear about them. They're confiscated at Google. Okay, they give you all the dirt about the other folks, but you don't hear about them. And this is important. Um, and then there would be complete normalization of people that of opinions and strategies. Um, at segments in history around that. And anybody that got a thing to say about the Wilders should talk about the women, because if there were no evidence to help her before the rape, before the murder, then we can't compete Wilders. Very simply put. Okay, it's like you have to show that the culture you're defending stands up to the standards that will abolish colonialism. That's Mandela standards. And nowadays, it's abolishing satanic ritual abuse and the ritual abuse since pre-biblical times, and of course, more equity between men and women. And people take it, oh, but women fight, but women let them go to the army. Israeli women go to the army. Okay, there were 400 days of kidnapped women that were raped and tortured for 400, for almost 500 days. They were the watchers. They were the ones that said there's something going on across the border. They were life threatened, and then they were kidnapped, and the houses were ruined sometimes. Okay, so it didn't help anybody to say that. What's more important, instead of talking about, oh, let women serve in the army and ta 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 ta, when the women were raped in the household by forced marriage and so on. So let's talk about the MK Ultra that is also using rape and electrocution to create these dissociations. In the 60s, they began to do it modernly to children of what we know, probably way before that. And again, it's based on tribal shamanic training. And so when we come to tend to that, we need to tend to that. We will not be tending to what we don't like about the cult. Cult is sometimes a closed society because they're persecuted. Romani people are persecuted. What do we know about them? That can breed incest. That can breed neurodegenerative diseases and blood degenerative diseases. That can breed suicide. That can breed crime. That can breed many things. Just the reality of being persecuted. And so this both the notion of not to persecute cultures, that is bringing them to open their standards, okay, to release those standards that are sometimes very patriarchal, sometimes very matriarchal, and it's Inuit people that talk about incest and their connection to society. It's from them that I know that. So this is to me reverence of Inuit people, not okay, anything else. And in every society, we need to turn to it in our own lineage. These are tough topics, but it's those things that it's what we don't like about that culture that we need to tend to in our own lineage to basically get the results. There was a Malawi, Malawi leader that abolished child weddings and canceled the child weddings. I don't know how she got to do that, but those stories that I'm looking into, because this is the type of thinking. And we're talking about the worst of crimes, and those worst of crimes are performed by children. Okay. And if we want to tend to that, we need to listen to those children that survived, and we need to come up with new models of thinking that's not necessarily head hunting, because if this is a communal practice, then we need to change within communities. Okay, and you say, how do we balance that with sovereignty for communities and so the sovereignty of the individual? This is the Pluto sextile, Pluto Aquarius sextile Neptune in Aries. Is sovereignty going viral? There are going to be a lot of other tendencies as well. It's the notion that the power of community is nothing without the power of the sovereign. We have to be inclusive of the sovereign. And I met 2 times, one around 7th of October, and I reside in the Israel part. So when the invasion and the horrible rape and ritual human sacrifice began, before the response that everybody knows of, right? That entire, I think they are going to dissolve Hague. Like, I think the ICC days are numbered after that, but because it was a NAVO USA, NAVO USA, NAVO USA. The USA withdraws from NAVO, but it's the USA underneath the NAVO. Like you could not really, just like in the Security Council, you could not go without the P5. That's China, Russia, US, UK, and France. Okay, that are the rational players according to after the Second World War. You could not invade the country without Security Council unanimous decision of the P5. Okay, any one of them could veto such a decision. Okay, so you could not invade for those countries. Now, when you talk about the NAVO, do you really think that NATO could do anything? It's mostly European. It's just mostly European. Okay, most of the countries are in Europe. Then there is the USA and some Kenya. I like to talk about Kenya. Okay, and you could not do anything in NAVO without approval of USA. Why was Rutte elected to be head of NATO? He was marketing himself as the Trump whisperer. Now NATO wants to wash its hands. Now USA wants to wash its hands clean from NATO. But the military operations we call MK Ultra say it's NATO, but it's USA, funded by your taxes. So, and when they get homeless, then of course they behave badly. And Section 8 is not housing first. An open dialogue is to believe the patient. That's the cure for schizophrenia. So we understand what schizophrenia is. To me, it took a decade to get that. I don't expect you to get it from one video, but if that sparks your mind to think and to wonder, if you wonder what am I sponsored by, well, it's Rothschild, I believe, because I'm on welfare in Israel. That would be my funding. If we follow the money, that would be probably my funding. It needs compound taxes from my own dividends that I would get for basically saying no to corruptions, but also identifying actual opportunities to correct for previous